Hi, you're on the This Is Crime channel. I'm Matilda. Listen to my new story. Man Beast: How the First Soviet Maniac Was Caught. Murders committed by madmen are horrible, but even more chilling are the stories of those who killed while sane. Muscovite Vasily Komarov was the first serial killer in the USSR. He took the lives of strangers not to satisfy a vicious passion for murder, but in pursuit of profit. In the 1920s, this pervert kept the whole of Moscow in fear and managed to kill about 30 people. Vasily Terentievich Petrov, and that was the name of the killer at birth, was born in 1877 in a large peasant family from Vitebsk province. The boy's parents were absent-minded and drinking people. Therefore, Vasya became addicted to alcohol very early. At the age of 15, he was already drinking methyl alcohol, and by 18 he became a complete alcoholic. At the age of 20, Vasily was drafted into the army. How and where he served is unknown, but after returning home, nothing changed in his life. For a while, Petrov was drinking, but then he began to look for work. In 1904, he went to work in the Far East, where Russia was at war with Japan. From earnings, Vasily brought some money, but drank it in a couple of weeks. Not wanting to work harder, Petrov began to steal. He was caught red-handed breaking into a military warehouse and was sent to prison for a year. After being released, the man decided to go to a place where he is not known and settled in Riga. In the city by the sea, Vasily married a widow with 2 children and settled down for a while. In 1915, the peaceful life of the citizens of Riga was disturbed by the approach of the Kaiser's troops. Like many other Russians, Petrov left the Baltics. He chose to live in the calm and then still well-fed Volga region, but soon the revolution broke out. In 1917, Vasily volunteered for the Red Army, where he even managed to serve as a platoon commander. During his service, Petrov participated in punitive expeditions and at one time led a firing squad. In the service of death. In the army, Petrov developed a perverse attitude toward killing as an educational method. He even began to take pleasure in shooting deserters and alien class elements. In 1919, Commander Petrov was unlucky and was captured by the Denikins. And already in 1920, he, as if nothing had happened, under the new surname Komarov, appears in Moscow. Komarov had a strong aversion to labor, but there was no other way out, and he got a job as a coachman in the Central Committee for the evacuation of the population. Vasily drove people and cargo, which he systematically embezzled. Stolen food and clothing thief sold at the market. Very soon, Komarov realized that he could not see big money in the civil service. He resigned from the committee and became a private cab driver. Vasily Komarov committed his first murder spontaneously. He was selling a horse at the market, and a buyer approached him, some peasant. A plan for easy money quickly matured in the cabman's mind. He invited the buyer to his house to hand over the papers on the animal and to celebrate the deal. The peasant did not feel the trick and went home to Vasily on Shabolovka 26. Komarov later said that he hesitated before the first murder. He made his decision after a few drinks. To his misfortune, the buyer admitted that he planned to resell the horse. In Moscow, to buy a good animal can be cheap, but in his remote village for him will give a lot of grain. Already it can be taken to the capital and sold at a profit. The stranger's business acumen infuriated Vasily. He went out to the barn and took a rusty hammer. With it, he hit the drunken guest as hard as he could on the head, splitting the skull into pieces. The blood flooded the room, and Komarov spent a lot of time cleaning up. After that, he was more prudent. Before breaking the head of the victim, the maniac put a bucket or basin. The first victim, Vasily took under the cover of darkness from the house and buried on a neighboring plot, overgrown with bushes and weeds. The hunt of the cabman Komarov. The first murder was easy for Vasily and brought good money. After that, Komarov began to go hunting, preferring the horse market of the capital. Everything went according to the same scenario: the sale of a horse, an invitation home, a drink, a hammer blow, and a grave in the vacant lot. One day, Komarov's wife Sophia became an unwitting witness to the massacre. The woman returned home after hours and found a corpse there. She silently took a rag and began to scrub the blood spatter from the floor. That's how the serial killer got a reliable assistant. It must be said that the woman coped with the destruction of evidence perfectly. Later, investigators tried to find traces of blood in the room where 36 people died, but could not. After the 17th victim, Komarov realized that there was nowhere else to hide the bodies. The abandoned plot had turned into a mass grave. Then he came up with the idea of taking the bodies in bags to the embankment of the Moskva River and throwing them into the water. The conveyor belt of death worked flawlessly, despite the fact that the killer did not have a sharp mind and did not even try to confuse the tracks. In the footsteps of the man-beast, the first missing persons reports to the police began to arrive in 1921. Very quickly, it was discovered that all traces led to the horse market in Serpukhov. The bodies of the victims were regularly found in bags on the banks of the Moscow River. The handwriting of the maniac was unchanged. He beat the victim on the head with a heavy blunt object, and then for reliability strangled with a rope. When the corpses turned out to be more than a dozen, Muscovites began to panic. Rumors spread around the city that some werewolf was at work, from which there was no escape. The order to urgently catch the killer was given personally by Lenin, and he also took control of the case. After that, Moscow began a large-scale search for a ruthless beast. Investigators found out that the killer was dealing with horses. First, he found victims only at the horse market. Well, and secondly, all the bags in which the bodies were packed were made of oats. It was clear that the killer was disposing of the victims away from the market and then disposing of the bodies. This could only mean one thing. The killer does not just work with horses, but has his own horse transportation. At that time, there were more than 2,000 coachmen working in Moscow. In addition, those who simply had a horse and carriage, or even a cart, were often moonlighting as cabbies. It was impossible to check this army of suspects, and the investigation became a dead end. Nevertheless, the police began to make rounds of the horse owners. They inspected their dwellings under the pretext of combating moonshining, and not everyone guessed what the real reason for the visit was. On May 8, 1923, the operatives came to the Komarovs' house. The owner was at home, and it was immediately clear to him that the policemen were not interested in underground alcohol. At first, Vasily kept himself in control, but when the detectives went to the barn in the yard, his nerves gave up. Vasily jumped out the window and fled. When the policemen entered the shed, they realized why Komarov was nervous. On the floor lay the still warm body of another victim. One and into the kvass. The next day, Vasily Komarov was detained in the village of Nikolskoye near Moscow. At the interrogation of the killer, behaved relaxed and cynical. He told without secrecy about the murders, clearly savoring the details. He called his victims disparagingly clamps and did not show any regret. He assured everyone that he was fighting criminal speculation and human greed. One and kvass, joked the killer, telling how he wielded a hammer. Psychiatric examination recognized Vasily sane, however. He was found to have alcoholic degradation. It was not easy to investigate the serial killer. It was necessary to move around Moscow, but Komarov was everywhere waiting for angry citizens who wanted his blood. People demanded to give them the pervert for vigilante justice or boil him alive in the square. As a result of the investigation, Komarov was charged with 29 victims, which clearly upset him. The murderer insisted that there were exactly 33 victims. Toward the end of the investigation, the maniac began to justify himself and suddenly stated that he killed not for money, but for ideological reasons. But the law enforcers were fed up with the ravings of the bloody executioner from Shabalovka, and they were eager to bring him to trial. The trial of the man-beast took place in the building of the Polytechnic Museum. It did not take long, because the outcome was obvious. The first Soviet maniac, Vasily Petrov Komarov, and his model wife were sentenced to execution. In July 1923, the sentence was carried out. The children of the murderers were given to an orphanage, having previously changed their surnames. If you like this story, subscribe to the channel and put a thumbs up. Look forward to more stories from the team of our channel. This is Criminal.